Welcome, everyone. My name is Jazmin Medina, and I'm a later stage venture capital investor at NewView Capital in San Francisco. I am absolutely thrilled to be at LTX Fest this year to speak to two amazing trailblazers and entrepreneurs about the new Latinx wave of Fintech and how Latinos are playing a major role in the growth of small businesses and then also wealth creation. I'm joined by Beatriz Acevedo and Sean Salas. And I'd love to kick it off with introductions from the both of you and the current companies that you're working on and the vision you have for your platform.
Do you want to go, Sean, or do you want to just follow the protocol of ladies go first? We can switch it off. In a very equal world, you should go first.
No, but even not because you're a lady, it's because you're just more of a chingona than I'm a chingona.
No, that's not
big
true.
Deal.
That's not true. Yeah, that is not in my book, but I'm happy to. We'll go by alphabetical order. That'll be easier. All right. So my name is Beatriz Acevedo. Like Jazmin just said, I am a very passionate Latina immigrant entrepreneur. I am very excited to be working on a new startup called Summa Wealth. Sean just asked me recently in his podcast, how did I ever think of starting a new company in an economic downturn and in the middle of a pandemic? But I do think because of those two factors is why Summa needs to exist today, because it's all about empowering our Latino, Latina, Latinx community, don't want to trigger anybody out there, into really owning their economic power. So in moments like this, it is incredibly important that we arm our community with the tools, with the services, with the products, with the education, with the community specifically, to not be scared, to ask the questions of the things they don't know, to find these answers among others like themselves, to feel included, to feel like they belong. So what better time than today to do that? For me, it's very personal that although I am very proud of the fact that we are heavily represented in numbers and our community is always quoted on how extraordinary they are as consumers, I would also love to hear, one of these days what extraordinary investors they are, or how we are the #1 community that has emergency savings accounts, which today we do not have. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but it's exciting to be building this company at the service of our community. The whole vision of Summa is to close to try to close or contribute to close the Latinx wealth gap. I know that's a very big goal, but I hope that in my lifetime I get to contribute to that. So if this company, for this company to truly succeed, it can't be that the founders and the investors and everybody else built wealth and not our community. For this company to say we were successful, we really need to build this wealth together and start really arming our community into how we go about maybe from ground zero after this pandemic, building generational wealth juntos. So I'm super excited, super honored to be here. First time that I meet you, Jazmin, heard great things about you, so excited for the conversation, and always an honor to be with my friend and mentor, Sean Salas. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. And it's absolutely an honor to have you as well.
Yeah, and it truly is an honor to share a virtual seat with both of you. Quite frankly, I've known Beatriz, since the beginning of this year. In many ways, COVID has brought many different leaders within the Latino community together. I mean, before I met her, I was already a big fan. So for her to call me a mentor, let alone a friend, is like a huge deal. I probably already multiple appearances of Beatriz on panels, and even most recently last weekend I saw her on a panel, a stacked panel, and she just continues to blow me away. So honored. And of course, Jazmin, we're classmates. I knew Jazmin before she was a big deal venture capitalist, before she broke into the industry, and now look where you are today. So truly humbled to be with Power Latinas on this panel, and a little bit about me. So I'm Sean Salas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Camino Financial. We're a mission-driven fintech platform pioneering affordable credit to underbanked Latinx-owned businesses here in the United States. Just to give you a snapshot of our typical borrower, 96% of them are Latino, 25% of them don't have credit history, and the median account balance of any given borrower is about $2,300 when our average check size is about $15,000. So we're truly lending to thin file, cash-based micro businesses. I don't even call them small businesses, micro businesses in the US Latinx market. That profile for most lenders in the industry, if they see that credit profile, they do a 180-degree turn and run as fast as possible away from that opportunity. And we go straight at it. And we found a lot of value in building a age. We're getting a lot of validation around the importance of being able to extend capital to a community that, as we've seen, haven't been able to get as much during the toughest of times.
Awesome. Well, I do want to take it back and start with both of your origin stories, and sort of leads to the next question of how the entrepreneur in you was born. And sort of leading up to that question, I think the beauty with connecting with professionals in the Latinx community is that while we all walk different paths, we're often bonded at times with similar challenges, immigrant stories, and these really defining moments on how we found our companies or really propel our determination forward. And so I'd love to just ask each of you to share your origin story on how the entrepreneur in you was born.
Sure. If you want me to go? All right. We can switch.
Yes, perfect.
All right, cool. So I'm the son of an entrepreneur who immigrated from Mexico in pursuit of the American dream. And I know that sounds cheesy, but given her limited educational background, she came here and sought entrepreneurship as her only way of building real generational wealth for herself, her family, and her community. And so she opened over 30 restaurants here in the greater Los Angeles area. And so that's the world I grew up in, and it was great. It was like I actually kind of grew up with the silver spoon, but all of a sudden it was taken from me because my mom lost her business. It kind of came down to a crash all abruptly for a variety of reasons. And at that point in time, you can imagine my mom was just done, thought the American dream was done, decided to move back to Mexico with her youngest twins, that's Kenny and me, and remarry and restart her life. And so that was a character building moment for Kenny and me, to say the least. It was also a blessing in disguise. We grew up for a good chunk of our lives of our formative years in Mexico from 12 to 20 years old. Then came back to the US and relived that immigrant story. And it's a story, I never knew what it meant to be a Latino until I came back when I was 20 years old. Because when you're, under 12 years old, you don't know. Like everyone's like, you don't know what racism is, quite frankly. Some people do, but hopefully you don't, right? But it's inevitable to be exposed to that once you start becoming older and realizing the differences between you and others and how people perceive you. And so I think that really, reliving that immigrant story was something special. It's something that definitely resonates in how I pursue business today. Fast forward to present, we cut our teeth, and I say we because Kenny and I did the same thing. Yes, we cut our teeth in finance and investment banking, both pursued careers in private equity, working for two of the larger private equity funds focused on investing in minority-owned businesses, and saw, got a lot of great experience, but also saw the limitations of private equity as an investment vehicle into Latino-owned businesses in particular. Just to give you a sense, private equity, they're investing in companies that are making at a minimum $7 million in EBITDA or cash flow per year. The average size of a Latino-owned business generates around $200,000 in revenue per year. That's roughly 1/3 of the size of the average small business in the United States. So these are truly micro businesses. And so that really was a seed that was planted, amplified by my personal experience. And then we were lucky enough to germinate that seed while we both got our MBAs at HBS. And that's where I met Jazmin. Of course, since then, the rest is history as it relates to Camino Financial. So it wasn't a light bulb moment. That's what I want to leave you with. It wasn't a light bulb moment giving back and investing in my community has always been my true north. And that of Kenny and me. I'm lucky to have, you know, my partner since the day I was born. And so really, we just kept on, you know, building different experiences, both professionally and personally, that ultimately led into what today is Camino Financial. And that in turn will also be amplified, right? I hope we continue to call it Camino Financial. But the point is that, you know, this is, you know, true to my heart. It's not a company, it's a purpose.
I love that. I love that. It's such a great question, Jazmin, right? Because you're like, how did it all start? Right. I've always thought, I'll go with the later stage in life of when I always thought that was my true entrepreneurial moment. Although recently I remember something as a kid, I'm like, oh, that was a side hustle. But, you know, the day I never thought of being an entrepreneur. I didn't know what an entrepreneur was. In my family, I guess my grandparents' side who did commerce, they were entrepreneurs. But my mom and my dad went to college. My dad was an attorney. My mom's a PhD psychologist. So they definitely wanted me to follow a more traditional path. I mean, to this day, it's very funny. Somebody asked me the other day on this Twitter career job fair, like, they're like, is your family supportive of what you do? I'm like, yeah, they're supportive, but they don't quite understand what I do, right? Like my mom sometimes is like, ay, mijita, I pray to God every day that you get a real job, right? And you're like, I have a real job, yeah. But it's not the traditional path of like, you know, I went to college. I mean, I did go to college because she definitely made me finish college, but she was like, when are you starting your master's and your PhD? I'm like, never, like that was not the path for me, which is nothing about that being the path for other people. But so I didn't see my parents being entrepreneurs. I saw my parents following their career and being, you know, very high into education but not so much being entrepreneurial. But the day I became, or this for real, an entrepreneur was the day I lost my job, right? So I had a really cushiony job at the biggest network in Mexico, where I'm from. And I was the only female executive producer, host, writer. I had won 3 Emmys for the network. Never in the history of Mexico had Mexico as a country won an Emmy. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking like I'm cruising through this job till I retire, right? And it was just a great job. And then one day I got a fax. You'll know how old I am. And so you would just get this little thing faxed into your office, like a photocopy. And it just said from a coordinator who I'd never met. Now my relationship was always with like the president of the network. So nothing wrong with a coordinator firing you, but I did get the notice from someone much lower and in the food chain. And it just said that all of my shows have been canceled 100%, and with no explanation, just like, thank you very much. But I wasn't let go, but it was like, you could still collect your salary, but you're not going to be on air. And it was at the time that if they felt like you had a little bit too much power, or in their perception you did, then you would put in this refrigerator, like literally they would call it el refrigerador, to just kind of chill you out, especially if you were a woman. And it was because the men in the newscast didn't like that I was getting the interviews they wanted. It was just, you know, whatever, politics. So when I lost my job, really, because I wasn't, if I get that offer today, just collect your salary, I'd be like, yes, I'm going to just do philanthropy and be a mom. But, you know, I was in my early 20s, super arrogant, chip on my shoulder. I'm like, what? I quit. Regardless, I lost my job. So, you know, it was just a very sobering moment and a very humbling moment as well. You know, my parents I'm a border girl. I was born in Tijuana. So my parents were like, great, you can come back home. And I was like, no way I'm going to go back home. Like I came to this city to make it. I was in Mexico City and I'm not, you know, okay, I can do it on my own. And I remember going to, and this is my sobering moment when I was like, I got to do something about it. Being in the supermarket and trying to buy like a carton of milk, like just like a small carton of milk, and my American Express not going through. And the one was like, yeah, your American Express doesn't go through. And I was just like, and seeing that there was like on a cover of a magazine that was called Eres or Somos as like the biggest thing of the moment with Ricky Martin. I remember perfectly. I still have the magazine, and I couldn't afford a $2 milk, right? Probably it was less in Mexico. And I was just like sobbing my eyes out outside of this Superama, which was the super. I remember the day so clearly. And I just like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to? So I became an entrepreneur by default. You know, I started my own company in my apartment. and it was only me, and I, started hustling. Luis Miguel was my first client, which was, I'm very grateful for that, and started a company called EPK Productions and started producing electronic press kits for all these musicians. And that was the start of sort of like my independent career, because I just, I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to pay my rent or my credit cards or anything like that. So I became that by necessity. But thinking back as when I was younger, I remember my parents would always have these people over for carne asadas at the house on Sundays, and I would always try to perform for them. So I'm like, there I was sort of like in my side hustle, and I would do everything from gymnastics to poetry to theater, like anything I could entertain them with. And then I would run to the kitchen and get my mom's little like tortilla holder where she would like put her warm tortillas. And I would pass it around at the end of my performance. And I'm like, there I was in my pre-seed funding, right? Like I was just already collecting money at 10 years old. So I think I always had it in me to be an entrepreneur, but I never really planned for it. I planned to, continue in a comfortable career where, I did well, even as a young adult, and never saw myself sort of like starting my company, starting something different, but it's the best thing that could have ever happened to me. So every time I see that president of that network, I'm sure to thank him and the team for firing me in my early 20s.
Oh, I love it. They're probably regretting that right now.
They wanted to be investors in my previous venture, and we almost made it work, but we went with somebody else.
It all comes full circle. I'm a very big believer of that. So Sean, I know that you touched a little bit on this, you talked about a little bit of the role you had prior to the current ones and sort of what led you to create Camino Financial. But I do want to double click on, how did you build conviction around your idea and why your platform needs to exist today? It's a big question that I think, all entrepreneurs ask themselves. And it's a big question that you have to defend whenever you are asking people for money as well. And so I'd love to figure out how you built that and how you got support for people around the table around that idea.
Yeah, I think, it starts with passion, right? And I think I made that pretty clear that this is not a company, this is my purpose. I'm not looking to, I don't have an exit per se as it relates to what I'm trying to do here at Camino Financial. Neither Kenny nor I nor our management team, which is a beautiful thing because we've been working together from the beginning. But so it starts with passion, but I always, sometimes, especially with Latinos, we have a Latino audience, so I'm going to direct what I'm telling to you, right, is that, sometimes we're blindly passionate. And we should not be blindly passionate.
Passionate, yes. Blindly, no.
No, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you not become, you still are passionate, but not blindly passionate? Well, you have to support your passion and your conviction, especially if you're raising outside capital, with data. And so the good news is that being in the U.S., the Latino market is 2.6 trillion. It grew 8.7% over the prior year period. It's the largest measured by GDP, and so what I'm quoting is GDP of the U.S. Latinx market versus consumer purchase power, which those numbers are quoted, and so I want to clarify that point. And what's interesting, if you measure it by GDP, it gives you the opportunity to benchmark with other countries. And so we are the largest Latinx market in the world. Brazil actually for the same period is about 2 trillion, whereas we're 0.26 trillion. And so it's a much larger market. And then we're also about twice the size of Mexico. And that's trillion with a capital T. Now, so the market opportunity is there, right? Now the question becomes, why aren't people paying attention to it? And this is something that I quite haven't gotten to the answer. I think there is systemic racism in the United States. I think we've seen that theme amplified during COVID, but that already existed well before COVID. And so we need more people like you, Jazmin, quite frankly, to be in positions of power where you can actually make investment decisions, because ultimately what I'm seeing is there's a disconnect between those that have the power to invest, but don't give that entrepreneur, that venture, the benefit of the doubt, independent of the data. But ultimately, I think if we do a good job, making that data available, I think that is a part of the equation. But other parts of the equation is helping build the ecosystem so that we can have more people, quite frankly, like you, Jazmin, that are in positions of power that can contribute to that ecosystem from an investment standpoint. And I'm going to speak for myself, but maybe partially for Beatriz, because her and I intersect a lot in these circles. I think that's why I invest so much of my time in doing things like this. Of course, you need to contribute to the ecosystem before you can take from it. I am incredibly grateful and recognize how lucky I am to be in the position that I am today, having raised over $120 million both in equity and debt, and we're just. But it's all about once again solidifying that conviction with data, so that not only are you passionate, but you're passionate and you have the data to support that passion, so you can find that lure investors in so that they can support you, with the caveat that as a Latino raising money, you're going to hit some barriers along the way. And I'm going to give you a balanced view, right? Sometimes that data and that passion is not enough for a lot of people. I consider myself lucky. I think I'm optimistic that the ecosystem is growing. It's getting more sophisticated, but we're still not 120% there yet. So by people just being here, listening to this webinar, that's a first step in the right direction. I make myself available a lot on social media and so forth. On LinkedIn, people submit requests over LinkedIn PM to have a one-on-one with me, and I make myself available. Not to everybody; it's impossible to make yourself available to everyone. But for people that I think I can have an impact with, I make myself available. So once again, it's conviction, but it's also the notion of helping build that ecosystem, because we're not 120% there yet. Even if you have conviction, even if you have passion, even if you have the data to support investments in your space.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And thank you for always making yourself available to me via WhatsApp, Sean. But I think, being absolutely passionate, like for me, passion and hustle, right? Like are that two combination that is invincible. I see people with a lot of talent, but without the passion and without the effort, it's hard to really make it. So I'm always like, even if you don't have talent, but you have passion, you have hustle, I think you have a pretty good chance to succeed. I also, I speak from a place of incredible privilege. Like Sean, I've been able to fundraise a substantial amount of capital from my previous company, being a woman, being an immigrant, being a Latina, invited to tables where big decisions get made, to boards where I'm able to, connect with people that a lot of other people in my community don't have that opportunity. So I know that all of that plays a very critical role in you having the passion, in you putting in the hard work. And also having that data, like our community is not going to go away. It's only going to grow, right? We're just getting started. The average age of US born Latino is 19. So definitely much, much younger than the average age of a non-Latino in their 50s. We're just entering the workforce as boomers or retiring. Like the opportunity is absolutely there, but those opportunities have not been given equally to people in our community that are incredibly deserving, hardworking, smart. So for me, because I have had that, passion and data and being at the right time, at the right place, mixed with my privilege, I make it my life mission to open as many doors as I possibly can for any colleague that is deserving of an opportunity. I think I like to speak a lot about this scarcity mentality that we have as a community that is really not serving us, that we can definitely learn from other communities of color as well, where we just feel like, there's only room for you. And that's not true. There's not just room for one, there's room for many, right? And And I think at least we've proven that that has not worked, right? Like being so like, oh, I can only be the only one on this board. I can only be the only one at this dinner. I'm always, adding a +1 and bringing somebody younger, especially on big meetings, on boards. I ask the board if I can have an observer that I'm mentoring. Usually it's a Latina. And I love that. I would have loved to have been on a board as an observer before I had to run my own board in one of my companies. That was just a really difficult time because I had no idea how to go about it. So I do think that, the conviction that you speak about, Jazmin, is super important. The passion that Sean speaks about is super important. We have the data in our favor with, our growth and our contributions to the country, but that's not enough. I think if we don't go at it as a community, we don't make use of our collective power. And when I say this, you're like, well, I was really asking you guys about your fundraising but I talk to so many founders. I'm fundraising myself right now, and I'm connecting, I don't know, a half a dozen one with capital at the same time that I'm raising my own money. You could think, oh, well, why would you connect them with so-and-so, with fulanito? Because if he could be giving the money to, I don't care, right? I think they have incredible businesses. I think they're worthy. I know the people, and I have to tell you, and I haven't suffered in my fundraising either of somebody saying, oh, because now we invested in somebody you just introduced us to, there's no room for you. So I'm a big believer in that collective impact and of that, being generous and paying it forward of what life has given us in the places that we are at is a true responsibility that we have with our community. And maybe that's why we are where we are and we get to be, I'm a big believer in how the universe, works its way to, you're generous and there's generosity back to you. We don't do it because of that, but maybe that contributes, to us getting quote unquote lucky.
Yeah. I love the answers around this. I think it's incredibly important sort of highlighting that this is not a zero-sum game. And that when you take, you're not taking away from someone else, and the power of networks, the power of building community together is actually incredibly powerful, that a lot of people have leveraged, that have really launched their careers in successful areas. And it's one in which that I think is really important to talk about and embrace specifically within our community. We're going to double click a little bit more on the power of building partnerships and alliances as well. But before we get into that, I do want to talk a little bit about fintech and specifically the media verticals that you've worked in, Beatriz, and how they've changed over time. So can you walk us through how the specific fintech or media verticals that your companies operate in, how they've changed over the past couple of years, and what are the unique challenges or opportunities that are in place today?
Yeah, so obviously where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity. So I think as we have talked about our community being so underserved in so many ways and underrepresented and not understood correctly, because not all Latinos are the same either. That's where the opportunity lies. So obviously in my previous venture, it was all about building a brand and a community that really made you feel that you belonged, that there was a place that there was a community and people understood you and got you as an American, English dominant who consumed content digitally, right? Because the focus was on a very different demographic. It was Spanish dom, TV, etc. And there was a massive and growing demographic, much larger than the Spanish dominant, that was not being served. So although Suma, which is my current company, is not a media company and it's not an entertainment company, it is important from the data to know what you are doing. So when, we know from the data that millennials in general, not just Latinos, but Latinos tend to do it twice than just millennials. If they share a content that you put out there, they're twice as likely than non-Latinos to purchase that product or to subscribe to that service. So that's why engaging, when you think about talking to a lot of other CEOs from very iconic fintech companies, they're like, listen, we just can't connect with these Latinos. Now, when you double click on that and you ask them, how are you trying to connect? And they tell you Spanish language radio, and they tell you TV and all this stuff, unless you want to connect with an older demographic or just very recent immigrants, but as we know, immigration has slowed down, growth is coming from nativity, US born, they already are in the wrong strategy, right? So I think that's what makes it very hard. Now saying, okay, well, listen, these US born Latinos are already speaking English, so I'm already reaching them. I'm like, sure, you're reaching them, but you're not touching them. So they're not twice as likely to share and buy your product because you're just like reaching them as any other millennial. So I think that's where the big opportunity is for me, particularly with Suma. Also Sean, but I'll let him speak on for himself. But you know, when he says the customer I serve is the customer nobody's paying attention to or doesn't want, fantastic, there's the opportunity, you know. So we see what others don't. And we see that as valuable, and others don't see it as a priority, right? Where they're never over investing in our community, even with the data, which is baffling to me as it is to Sean. You're like, you know, we all are business people here. None of our companies are nonprofits. We run nonprofits on the side, but you know, we all follow the growth, and this is the growth. The way to to really future-proof a brand is being in business with US Latinos. There's no doubt about it, yet people continue to ask us, you know, where's the growth? Is it Mexico? Is it Brazil? Is it Colombia? You're just like, wow, like it's such a blind spot for this country, our community, you know, it's in your backyard. That's where the growth is. So for us, we're lucky that we are that, and that we see ourselves and our community and the needs, and that we are building companies. How has it changed? Well, it's the demo that consumes mostly online. It's the demo that does most mobile banking than anybody else. It's just so perfectly primed. Now they have their challenges. You know, a lot of them don't know what a 401k is. They don't know how to invest. They are afraid to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, right? So I'm trying to change that, build a community first. The difference with other fintechs is people build the products first. And like my co-founder says, Javier Gutierrez, who's also a good friend of Sean's, says it's like most companies say, if you build it, they will come. And in our community is not flocking to these fintech companies. So it's not if you build it, they will come. You need to start with a trust. You need to start with a community. You need to start with education. You need to start at a place there, and then you can listen, you know, to what their real needs are, because we all think we know from the data that's available, but there's nothing better for them telling you exactly what it is that prevents them from having an emergency savings account or having an investment, etc. And then our philosophy is completely opposite. We will then and only then build the products that don't exist in the marketplace that we think our community wants and needs, and then that'll be on a stage 3 of what we do. So yeah, I think hopefully that is sort of like that answer you were hoping for.
No, incredibly powerful.
I tend to go on so many tangents. I'm like, and then when, so I apologize. I get very passionate, like Sean says.
No, it's an incredible answer, because there's nuances in the data there that not a lot of people are recognizing. So very interesting.
And so if I could add to what Beatriz was saying, I think, you know, as I think about the evolution of fintech and then where that evolution intersects with the Latino opportunity here in the United States, I apologize in advance if I bore people with this brief history on fintech, but fintech really, at least alternative lending, which was the primary credit product that really brought fintech to light, that and payments with PayPal. But using alternative lending as just a quick case study for the evolution, you know, really emerged after 2008, right? You're seeing, you know, the Great Recession, right, happen, banks really pulling out of credit, and that really created a lot of opportunity for non-bank lenders, not only to come into the market, but also for VC to say, hey, one, there's a need, but two, there's also an opportunity to tech up the opportunity substantially so we can lower transaction costs and service a market or markets that were traditionally being underserved. And that size of the opportunities have only expanded since the Great Recession, right? So that happened, and you saw the emergence of the Prospers of the world, the lending clubs of the world, the OnDecks of the world, right, come into the market and really did start taking a ton of market share a market opportunity just in lending for small businesses that's measured around $120 billion in loans. And so that's really like, that's where they started. And then came what I'll call the disruptors. Those are like the disruptors 1.0, then came the disruptors 2.0. And they really just optimized what the 1.0s were doing, but still with a mass market focus. And most of those companies have really fallen flat. It was just that everyone was kind of just trying to follow the trend, fintech, right? This seems exciting. And along these lines, right, once again, there was, and so, you know, it's just an optimization play, right? And most of them going with only one product. And then now you're seeing this third phase. And I think these are where the winners are going to be. The winners are, you're going to see the Disruptors 3.0 focusing on super serving a specific market, because that's where there's, you can go into that market. To Beatriz's point, you can go and start building a content strategy around that, a brand strategy around that, a trust building strategy around that. Right? Ideally, you want to pair that as well with a category killer product, a beachhead product, a hero product. Everyone calls it something different, right? And that's what that's a, I think the best is 3.0, which is now a big disruptor. They're pretty big now. Is SoFi, where they kind of went in with those, with those kind of Henry's high earners, not rich yet, kids that were, graduating from, fancy schools and really refinancing out their loans. And then realizing that, hey, these kids are one day are no longer going to be kids, and they're going to be the future wealth of this nation. And then I want to deepen the relationship with them with other products and services, right? And so you saw this market kind of, in summary, go from, first of all, unbundling what banks were doing with specific products, right? Starting with, disruption 1.0, then evolving to 2.0, which was like, okay, slight marginal improvement, but not that exciting, to 3.0 being like, okay, now I'm focusing on a market where I can be very, very disruptive, right? Even to the 1.0s and 2.0s, right? And then over time, start deepening the relationship. So I think the next phase is, now we went through that phase of unbundling. Now we're seeing a rebundling a lot of these players, right? Now they're offering multiple products and services, now that they already have that beachhead product into those market, and now they can deepen the relationship with the market. And that's why you're hearing this neobank term being thrown out a lot into the market. Every fintech wants to be a neobank. Every big tech wants to be a fintech. I mean, and it's all starting to be a modge podge, right? But I think that's at least, if I had to kind of describe the evolution in a linear fashion, that's how I describe it. And of course, the intersection at the Latinx end is really effectively, how do we super serve this market opportunity that's been completely a blindside? I'll leave you with one point, which is today I asked the CEO of a very well-funded fintech with millions of users. They claim they're focused on the underbanked market opportunity. I asked them a very simple question. How do you define underbanked, and what proportion of your users are Black and brown? And you know what the response was? Oh, we don't track ethnicity and race of our users.
Oh my God. Unbelievable. But you're super serving people that
right.
It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
But at the same time, I'm like, yes, because you are totally blindsided by the opportunity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's just like, how can you even say you're serving the underbanked when the largest and fastest growing underbanked market in the world, is here in the United States of America, okay? So that these things kind of like get me like, woo! Like, Also at the same time, I'm like, okay, it's ours to lose. Hay que ponernos las pilas.
Yep.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting that you guys are touching on here is that, whenever I think about how the industry has changed in venture, you always had companies that were coming out that were horizontal software companies. And now what we're starting to see is verticalization. You have got a ton of vertical software companies that are focused on either the retail industry or, you know, certain segments. And what's interesting is what it feels like you guys are saying is that there could be vertical plays in here that really target certain demographics that need to be served up in very different ways. And you've got to leverage the data to understand how they interact. You've got to leverage the data to understand how they engage and how you can really create, you know, a sustainable business serving them up, which is only going to continue to grow to be one of the like fastest growing segments in the US.
100%. And if I can only add one point to that, and you hit the nail on the head, is that I also challenge Latino entrepreneurs not just to go the Latino route, just to go the Latino route, right? Like I also get this a lot where it's like, okay, what if I do this with the Latino angle to it?
That's not quite super serving of them.
Yeah. It's like, look, I always challenge people to understand, and I'm getting, once again, a little bit nerdy into frameworks that we used to use in business school, Jazmin. What's the job to be done? What are you trying to do, right? Like, for instance, home ownership amongst Latinos, I mean, like, literally, they are growing as well as they possibly can, right? If And there's a lot of like broker penetration among Latinos, right? So do you need like a Latino focused real estate platform with a tech spin? I don't know, right? Like my question is like, well, like, okay, tell me more, right? Mm-hmm. What are you trying to do and makes you own and super serve this niche market? Maybe you don't you're verticalizing, for instance, using small business, right? More by industry, right? And then maybe that industry has a higher concentration of Latinos. So in effect, you're also helping Latinos. And so I also challenge people, because I get this all the time when I talk about the Latino opportunities, like, perfect, I'm gonna put a Latino spin to coffee, right? And it's like, that's okay. By the way, that doesn't sound bad. I have a friend that does that, right? Yeah. His coffee's awesome. Okay.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I was going to say nothing wrong with them and La Monarca and all our favorite.
That example, but you get my point, right? Yeah. Which is I like the Latino
dog food for Latino pet owners. You know, it's like, I don't know that you need a mole flavored for your dog, but
exactly. I'm challenging people to also think a little bit broadly about how they can touch the Latino market, but not just be like, I don't want Latino entrepreneurs to be the only exclusively coming up with Latino focused ideas. That's what I'm trying to challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually, unless that's in your wheelhouse and your expertise, right? Because for me, like if somebody told me, well, could you do this with the Black market or the Asian, I'd be like, no, or not as well as I know, like US born millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like that is my absolute skill set. I'm a big believer that that's the growth, that's the opportunity. I know exactly how to build brands for them. I know how to build community for them. I know how to do content for. So I'm also very honest on the things that I wouldn't be the best, right, founder or CEO to be running a company that's not in a demo that I feel incredibly comfortable and passionate about. So I guess that's the other side.
Yeah. This is a great lead up to the next question around company building. So, you know, many of the audience members are currently working on companies and, you know, or are thinking about potentially launching. And my question to you guys is, you know, can you give us a sense of what your journey was from MVP to launch? And were there any twists and turns in that? What are the relevant lessons learned on that, you know, that disciplined process that you had to go through to find that product market fit and where you wanted to launch?
Well, I just launched 2 months ago. So my answer is going to be short, and I'm going to defer on this one to Sean, at least on Suma. I mean, definitely very unorthodox way to launch a company, as Sean very accurately pointed out to me. During our last session, economic downturn, pandemic. I have never met most of my employees or collaborators, but on Zoom. I've had no investor meetings in person as I'm used to. I love to be in a room and feel the energy and connect with people. I've done none of that because it's only been, you know, a few months that I launched, and then just a few months back that I committed 100% to this idea. So very different experience from any other company that I've had. But you know what, you adapt, you know, you definitely adapt to a new skill set, which for me has been incredibly, I miss a lot the in-person contact, but I'm learning the skill of doing things virtually. So, you know, convincing people that they should come and work for you for not a lot of money, as in the startup life is, convincing investors that you are the right founder to back, talking to people to become advisors that you absolutely need in the company. So I haven't had a lot of twists yet. I literally finished my investment deck a week ago. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of pivoting that will happen. It helps that you already come from another startup that already went through thousands of turns and twists. I think for me, the thing that I'm being incredibly careful from my lessons that I've learned in my past ventures, particularly in my last one, is that not all money is the same, and that I want to make sure that whoever I take money from, I am incredibly values aligned with. So just being super careful about that, particularly because the mission of this company is to really be able to have our community build wealth. So the last thing I want is a VC breathing down my neck that I need to start pushing these products into before they are ready for that. And not that every VC would do that, but definitely being incredibly careful of the partners. And I'm just being very attentive to the questions, the answers that I get. Whenever I talk about the demo after an hour and they still tell me that, you know, I should, you know, they get it. You know, it's like the people coming from Latin America that have no credit. I'm like, no, they're not coming from anywhere. They're being born in the US. So just like little small red flags like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, obviously in 2 months, my plan is still intact. Is the same that we talked about: building community, building brand, building content, arming our community with free tools that they can start getting control of their economic power, then being a hopefully a very big funnel for partnerships, and eventually building our own products. So in the process, we've only built 3 calculators that are very easy and simple and free to use. We hope to build 8 more till the end of the year, but a full product might not happen in maybe a year and a half as we really listen to what our community needs. So I'm sure Sean will have a much more interesting answer on how his evolution of Camino Financial has happened.
Well, it definitely won't be more interesting than Beatriz's experience. I think, so here's one cool thing about Beatriz. I mean, this is why we were just friends in the making. We just didn't know it yet until the end. So our mission is to build generational wealth for underserved communities by offering affordable credit solutions to entrepreneurs, right? So the only difference is we're enabling generational wealth through entrepreneurs. And through a credit product with entrepreneurs very specifically. So it's very important, number one, that you establish your true north, your mission very early on, because that's going to be your compass, right? That's going to be your compass, because you're going to go like, it's a roller coaster. You're going to be doing this, right? But as long as you're kind of heading towards the same direction at all moments in time, I think that's fundamentally important. And so I'll share you the short or medium version of our experience, but I want to be very clear that setting your true north and using it as a compass, right? The North Star, right? And setting that as your means of establishing a compass for the direction of your business is critically important. I mean, that's everything. And so what we really started as a marketplace, and by being a marketplace, a marketplace is effectively a glorified broker of different credit products and services. That enabled us to, one, focus on our brand and content, right? To Beatriz's point, establish a digital relationship with our members. We call them members, we don't call them clients or users. And really focus on testing that hypothesis, right? One, is this a market that is open to transacting with credit exclusively online? And that was a big hypothesis because if you told anyone in the industry what we were going to do, we were going to be digital exclusive, we would get laughed out of rooms by many natives or incumbents, better put, in the industry. And I know everyone says that about tech disruption, but you know, I heard it firsthand, and it's hard not to get discouraged by it because a lot of these people are really smart people that know what they're doing. And so we were able to validate that very quickly. Two, by being a marketplace enabled us to have multiple different credit products that weren't ours, so it wasn't very capital intensive. And because we are by nature in a business that's very capital intensive, we have to lend money out. And so I'm always raising not just for equity, but for debt as well, and by the way, early on, which we'll get into my second phase, debt is actually a lot harder than equity. And so what ended up happening is, we tested that. We did about $7 million worth of loans, and through the marketplace, nothing was on our balance sheet. And through that, we were able to validate, wow, like once we started hitting some real scale and validating, one, yes, we could digitally engage our market. Two, we can listen to what their product needs were, like literally what Beatriz is talking about. And when we were listening to that second product need, what we were seeing is that the products that were available in the market weren't good enough to really serve the need. We felt that the market was fundamentally being mispriced, and you don't want to, of course, give them a high interest rate loan. So guess what ended up happening with our conversion rate? Almost went to zero, right? Because we're not in the business of putting people in difficult situations, right? We're building generational wealth and using credit as a tool to do that, right? And so then that really led to the second part of this phase, which is becoming a lender. And that, I will spare you the details, but there's a big catch-22 in being a lender, which is you have to have the credit history in order to validate to establish a credit history. And so how do you get that money? And so what we ended up doing is we were fortunate enough at that point in time to have raised $2 million in seed capital. We just closed around as we were pivoting from a marketplace to a balance sheet lender. And we said, you know what, we have $2 million in the bank. I'm going to put $1 million to work and pray that they pay me back. And if not, we're out of business in 6 months. And we did what we could.
So the praying worked.
The praying, that was our second biggest hypothesis, right? Is, first, once again, can you engage digitally with the market? Can you identify a product opportunity? And now three, okay, now that you've identified the product opportunity, can you build a model around the opportunity where you can price accordingly for mutual benefit, right? And if not, of course, you're done. And so that was kind of the next phase of our roller coaster ride, which wasn't that bad. Actually, it was really cool. Like, conversion went up, growth went up, and guess what happened? We ran out of that $1 million like this. And so then the next phase was effectively being like, okay, what do I do, and how do I get another few $1 million now, because now I have pent-up demand on my platform. Long story short, that was a nightmare. We went out of business almost 2 times during that phase. One of which, not to be overly dramatic, we did take kind of like hedge fund capital, because we're like, okay, I'm gonna take this hedge fund capital. It's at a very high cost, but I'm going to basically price my loans at a loss, which you never do in a capital intensive business, right? So that I don't price them up too much where, you start getting into what other online lenders have been doing and build a bad rep for. And we did that. Clearly the business model didn't work. And Kenny and I were left with the decision. We either raise our prices and stick with our lender, or we wind down the fund and we have 3 to 4 months to find another lender that will believe in our pricing strategy. It was raining that night, okay? Wow. And we were put in a difficult situation by the lender. Look, they're friends of mine. I know they need to make money for this to work too, so I get where they were coming from. And Kenny and I, decided, we'd rather go out of business than do that, because this is not what we were like. This is not what our mission was, to build generational wealth, right? Like, by offering affordable credit solutions to entrepreneurs, right? Latinx entrepreneurs, right? And so once again, sticking to that true north, and thank God, and this is where you get really lucky, right? I do think luck is the cross intersection between opportunity and skill, right? But those two need to intersect at the right time. And sometimes the timing isn't perfect, but it happened to be that we were lucky enough where the timing was right. We found this capital partner, a publicly traded company based out of Mexico, that they're like, hey, by the way, I've heard like there's all these fintechs trying to come in Mexico, but like no one's paying attention to the United States Latinx market. And it seems like your platform is ripe for growth. Why don't we invest in you both in equity and balance sheet? And let's see where we can take this. And so funny enough, it took a Mexican company.
That's amazing. I had no idea about that.
American company, yeah, an American company to basically grow our balance sheet in our platform. And since then, oh my gosh, just grew. Obviously, COVID has presented its challenges. We can talk about that separately. But that was it. And so I've heard people say this before. I don't know if it's true or not, but like, if you're going to be a unicorn, unfortunately, the rite of passage is you're going to have to go through at least a handful of near-death experiences. Unfortunately, I found that to be true. And we're not a unicorn yet.
But you've had a couple of near-death experiences, so you're on your way, amigo.
Yep.
It is very emotionally taxing. I'm almost getting emotional as I think about it. But what I love the most is not just Kenny saying, hey, I'd rather go out of business than deviate away from our true north. And not just Kenny, the rest of our management team. Yeah. We have lost one executive team member in all these transitions. And these transitions included significant pay cuts, uncertainty around whether you had a job in a question of 2 to 4 months, right? At points, weeks, right? But and it really is beautiful because getting that mission right and sticking to your true north and seeing it through even till the end. I mean, that's all you can ask for.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree so much with that true North Star.
Yeah. These are amazing takeaways. It's, the art of listening, learning, constantly testing your hypothesis, and then sticking to your true north. And what I think was really interesting, and both of you guys have sort of touched on this, is also choosing partners that are mission aligned, that also believe in that true north as well, which leads into a really interesting next question that I want to talk to you guys about around and I mentioned this before, we were going to get to this, is the importance of building community and trusted partnership and alliances. And so I'd love for you guys to chat a little bit more about how these, have helped you along your journey, whether they be, within the Latinx community, whether they be with investors or strategic partners, and the process that you went through in choosing the right person.
Yeah, I think I don't know about Sean, but I certainly have, I learned the tough route before on I guess I just took culture and mission and vision for granted. In every company I had, we had great company culture, and I thought great vision and great, but I never had taken VC capital. I never had a co-founder that I wasn't married to. In the case of Sean, it's his brother. So like family, like you're already so in tune on the things that you believe in. And there's other people that come in that, might not be exactly what you have in your head, but you haven't truly expressed it, that is such an important, critical part of where you are going together, no matter what the times do. That is really critical. I often say it's as critical or more as picking a life partner, right? Like, who are you going to choose to be an investor? Who you're going to choose to be a co-founder? I mean, that is so tough because things will get hard. There's no easy startup life, and certainly no becoming a unicorn, like Sean was saying, that is going to be easy. So you have to make sure that that person is fully aligned with that mission and vision and values that you have of where you want to go. So I've had good and bad in my previous ventures here. As I mentioned before, that is the one thing I'm being incredibly careful. Clearly, a partnership with somebody like Sean, which we're already talking about it, is a dream, right? Because we're like, perfect. This is exactly the type of partnership that I feel comfortable sending my community to, right? I know they will be in the best hands possible. So that makes me be very at ease. I have, obviously not saying any names, but when you're a new company, any new company, you want to prove that you have some revenue, that you've signed some paid partnerships. And I was securing something with a traditional banking institution. And then something happened that I just thought, somebody from the company said, do you really want to do that with this company? after everything that's happened lately. And I just thought, oh, you're right. It's like, it doesn't go with our mission. And just to Sean's point, it's like, sometimes if you forget, the people in your company will remind you that is not mission aligned. You know, that does not stand for our values and who we are. And that is beautiful, because you are talking about revenue. You are talking about them meeting a target for a bonus. They're already not getting paid that. So you would think that they wouldn't mention it, but they're the first ones who's like, hey, just a quick check. Are you sure? And I'm like, oh my God, you're absolutely right. Yes, no, better that we do this alone. So very critical, very important. If you are a company like Sean is with Camino Financial and I am with Suma, where we say we are mission driven. If you are not, and you're just going to take money from anybody and you can stomach, you know, investors that might be, you know, incredibly toxic, or partners that, you know, hurt your community, that's your choice. It certainly would never sit well with either of our companies.
That's right. And I guess the only thing I would add is, so partnerships is an interesting one. I'm going to take it from the perspective, I won't add to the investor partner piece because I think Beatriz covered it beautifully. And that's really what saved us based on the story that I just told you. So, so couldn't agree with Beatriz more. And quite frankly, I think I've lived every terrible story of an entrepreneur with the exception of bad partners. Thank God, because I've heard the worst stories. And maybe it's just a function of, you know, once again, co-founding this with my twin brother, but even my executive team and the investors that I've chosen. Oh my gosh, I love them all. And I literally have not one bad thing to say about like a bad investor experience or a partner experience. Yeah, there was that lending friction, and even then we broke a myth. I don't qualify it as a bad experience just because we were quick to identify. I think the only thing I would talk about in terms of partnerships is, and for the entrepreneurs in the room, is how good institutional or enterprise level partnerships can catapult your platform to the next level. And so as I think about, there's like, people call it the D2C, direct to consumer, and the B2B2C, right? Business to business to consumer. I will tell you that as it relates to the Latino market, I am a strong believer that you need to start with a good D2C, especially given that, you know, Absolutely. The positioning of Beatriz and I, like, look, it's a trust building strategy here, right? D2C not only helps you develop a relationship directly with the consumer, right? So that you can listen and design product around that consumer. It also enables you to be an active participant in the community. And so being in the background, right, through big corporations that don't 120% get it, right, is not, in my mind, the best place to start. However, I do think once you kind of you've dialed in your D2C strategy really well, I do think, and I can speak for Camino Financial, you know, we're not doing our job if in the next 10 years, 60 to 70% of our volume is coming through partnerships. I am a fundamentalist in believing that. I believe, one, it's in part because our members are looking for an omni-channel experience. Sometimes they don't want to just be exclusive to a certain channel or a certain partner, online versus offline. And so I think, and there's a lot of different partners out there where our credit solution can enable them to grow as well within this specific market. And so I do think that, you know, applying a B2B2C strategy, or in our case, a B2B2B, because there are business owners, right, is something definitely on our roadmap. But the nuance here is timing, because I've seen a lot of different businesses try to dual track that too soon, too early. One, the complexity of those businesses are they're very different businesses models, right? And getting one of those right takes a lot of time. And so I think, but there's a lot of successful case studies that start with the B2B2C. But I think as it relates to this specific market opportunity, I think a D2C is the right place to start, but eventually amplifying your platform to a B2B2C, such as the partnership that we're discussing in Camino.
And I think that the other nuance right here that we should definitely, flag is what you're talking about, trust. Trust is paramount for our community because, I was talking to one of these big financial institutions and they did a big study of, why do Latinos don't invest and don't save their money in banks and they're like, it's very interesting that out of the Black community, the Asian community, white, women, everything, why do Latinos always say talking about education, that the parents would say it's the one thing they can take away from you, right? And they're like, could you tell me who is they? This is like this big bank in New York. And I'm like, they, meaning you. I mean, not in a bad way, but if you think about of where, our parents or our grandparents, I remember very clearly, being a border girl again, that my parents had their money in a Mexican bank in American dollars, right? Because you could do that living at the border. They're like, oh, do you want to open your account in pesos or in dollars? My parents are like, dollars. You even have to pay for your rent in dollars in Tijuana. So dollars. Then the devaluation comes. And of course, you're like, thank God I have my money in dollars. Like, oh, no. You don't have your money in dollars anymore, right? There's no more dollars accounts. So it's like, so what just happened to your money? You just lost it all. So we have to, countries where you put your ATM card, there's no money that the banks can give you. So there is a lot of baggage that we all remember as kids, or maybe our kids, or from your grandparents, your parents, or that we've heard of the stories from our countries of origin where, you've had an experience with a traditional financial institution that wasn't great, right? Where your parents lost their wealth. So the trust is paramount. And that is the thing that I think that's the miss on, like, oh, we're going to target the Latinos. We're just going to translate this to Spanish. That's also another horrifying way to do it. But let's say that you think you're going to be campy and put a lot of, burritos in the ad and throw some Spanish words like abuela and, be like Me Too was, and you're going to just be good. You're not a trusted brand. People don't trust you. So what's very interesting for us, although we're so new, we get so many questions of like, okay, who do you trust? And we're like, oh my God, it's like, okay, what app do you recommend? Because this is Latino to Latino. Like, I trust you. So you tell me what app I download, right? And that's where I think, Sean, being a Latino CEO with a mission-driven company, myself being a Latina CEO with a super serving our community is so, so, so important. So I think that's paramount. And I think that's another big win in our favor for both of our companies.
Awesome. I just want to recap that because there was so many good nuggets of information in that. It's when you're thinking about partnerships, it's being disciplined, knowing when to potentially walk away, being mission aligned with your community members, and really building around trust. So many good takeaways from that. I know we're closing out on time here. I wanted to end this with a very, very short, lessons learned. There's a lot of Latinas sort of going through the program and learning, like, how am I going to pitch? How am I going to be as a CEO? And, the beginning of this journey. And so what I wanted to say is very quickly, maybe it's 30 seconds. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned as a CEO or leader that you wish you knew before?
I'll go first. So since it's 30 seconds, I'll let Sean close it out. For me is to trust yourself more. You know more than you think you do. And we've talked a lot about data, and data is incredibly valuable and paramount to both of our companies. But aside of the data, your gut has a lot of value. So even if the data is telling you something, and there's something in you that is like, this is not the right way, listen to your gut as well, and then value that. And even if you're in a new situation like me in fintech, people are like, how did you become a fintech CEO and co-founder? You know more than you think you do. So trust yourself more, know that your insights, know that your life journey is incredibly valuable, and just have that and your North Star of why you are in this business at the first place. And I think you're going to be doing really well.
Great. And I'll cheat and give you two learnings. One, just reiterating what Beatriz had said, align your purpose with your company and use that as your North Star, because you're going to pivot a lot, but you always want to make sure you're true to its fundamental purpose and your purpose. The second thing I would say, as it relates to fundraising, those that are interested in fundraising and you know to launch their businesses, I'd ask you to acknowledge that it's an unfair game, unfortunately, and to find your crutch. And for everyone's crutch is a little different. For me, it really was going to Harvard Business School and leveraging that network. I think 80% of my seed capital came from people that either graduated from Harvard or were introduced to me by alum. For others, it's going to YC. For others, it's having really good relationships within a specific industry and having those people support you. But find your crutch because it's you need an unfair advantage to raise money, and unfortunately, Latinos tend to have the biggest disadvantage when it comes to playing that game. So know the rules. Don't hate the player, hate the game. We can all over time change the game, but that is a longer term strategy, right? Because we need more Jazmins to be a part of building and contributing to this ecosystem. I think we're making progress, but we're not there. So find your crutch.
I want 2 seconds more, and I know we're out of time, but just to reiterate that, but if you didn't go to an Ivy League school, if you have no contacts in this industry, which was exactly my point, you know, I barely made it through college. I had no contacts. I didn't know what VC was. I was Googling Series A under the table. You know, my crutch was that I was just incredibly confident, right? That I really felt that because there was nobody like me in a sea of sameness in those VCs, like I felt so empowered that I've got this. Nobody has my passion, my insights, my experience, and it worked. I mean, I was able to raise over $50 million, never having raised venture capital before. So don't be discouraged that you don't fit in one track, which is amazing, you know? But if you don't, it's still possible that not having the contacts, not having the Ivy League school, you could make those top of the list of the Latinos who have raised the most capital so far.
Amazing. Beatriz, Sean, what an amazing note to end on. I want to thank you guys so much for, you know, giving us all of your nuggets of wisdom and, you know, stories throughout your entire journey. And I want to thank everyone joining us from LTX Fest. We hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference and at some point gets to have the pleasure of meeting Beatriz and Sean. Thanks.
Thank you, Jazmin, for everything. Thank you for moderating this session. Sean, always a pleasure to see you, amigo.
Likewise. Thank you, everybody.